Alright, welcome back. Now here we are, the final exercise for this first module. Now, my hope is that you've been exposed in some form or fashion to object-oriented programming. If you haven't, well, I've got resources that I can point you to. Talk to me in class and we'll get there. Um, it's an online section. Send me a message and I'll give you resources to get you up to speed when it comes to object-oriented programming and Python. So for this, we've got a list of students. And we've got students' names. And we're going to essentially create for each student, Juan, Bill, Stacy, Maria, and Charlie, scores associated with, say, their exams. They're each going to have 3 scores. So we'll start out the first one and add scores in. Now, they've got this set up in a way that their program's going to do it, but I want to go create a student object so we can create instances of students and have that do the work for us. Now, the way they've got this set up, they go create, using this class that I'm going to create, they create a student, and for each one there's the names. And where do we get the scores from? Well, the scores, they randomly generate them here. So they're going to create these instances of students and assign scores to them. Now, I'm going to go through and we're going to walk through this step by step in how to create a student object. We're going to create this student class, I should say, which they can instantiate to create individual student objects. Now, one of the things that they didn't do, I don't even know if this had run the way they've got it, we need to get that random integer in. We'll use the random library to import random integer so they can do that. It'll actually work. Let me shove that down so we can go do our work. So essentially what I'm going to create is a class. I'll start about here. And we'll call it student. And this student class is going to have a couple of built-in functions. So the first one we're going to deal with is going to be the init, or the initialization of this object. First things first, it's going to get self. So that anytime we refer to this object, whatever it is, whether it's Juan, Bill, Stacy, Maria, whatever we call this object we're creating, we're talking about that object. So self is the term we use. Let's set some default values. Name equals empty string, and the other, so name was the first one, and then we're going to have number of scores. I want camel case on there. And then we're going to get 3 scores. So each object will have a name, and we're going to have some scores. How many scores? 3. All right. I want to set all the scores initially to be 0, and I want to set the name, oh, I forgot my colon there. I want to set the name to be whatever I've defined it as. So, self was the object that we're creating. So we'll set the default values for self.name, oh, forgot my E, equals name. And then self.scores equals, well, I don't have any scores yet. So we'll just create this list, and it's empty. So I've got this empty list of scores. How many scores? Number of scores, I've got 3. From here, let's go ahead and we're just gonna input zeros. So we're gonna have 3 scores in there, so let's populate this thing with 3 zeros. For count and range, and the range is number of scores. Count and range number scores. And we come down self dot scores. So I'm pointing to this list that I created, and I want to add, and it's empty, I want to add, which means append to the end of it. What do I want to append to the end of it? A 0. That's all I did. So this init, and I'll put a little space in here, this initialization of a student class set default values. So I created these attributes, name and scores. I've created them, I've defined them, and set default values to them. Something is there. They're not just empty. So that's the initialization. Let's tab in. I'll come back. There's one more thing I want to do up there, but I'll do it a little bit later. Let's say def. And in object-oriented programming, we have accessors and mutators to get and set these values. So I've defined them here, so there's a value there. So I say get number of scores from where? Self. Get number of scores from self. Return. What do we want to return? We want the length of self dot scores. How long is scores? That's how many scores I have. So if I've got 1 score in there, then the length is 1. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's do another one. Let's get name. get name from where? Self. It's like saying, hey, what's your name? Well, the system's going to return what? Self dot name. It's whatever's stored in name. It's going to return that to me. Simple as that. What do we have? Let's score. Def. And I want to get scores. Get score. Self. But wait a minute, I need the index of what score we're dealing with. So let's give it an I. And I also need the name of the list that is storing those scores. So I want the list and which score in the list. Colon, come down. Oh no, I don't, hang on, let me think about this. I don't need the list because I'll deal with that in a second. I'll deal with that in a second. I won't need that because self has that in it. Return self dot, because scores is in self, scores I. So in scores, or in self, is scores. So I said go get that and get whatever I is. So if you know what the index, we can get whatever the score is there. Let's do another one. Def. They want get average. And we're going to have self. And that's all I need. I don't need a comma. I don't need anything else. And how do we calculate the average? We're going to say return. You know what? I want to use the sum function. So I want to add up the scores. And then I want to divide it by how many scores there are. You okay with what took place here? The average is the total of all the scores divided by how many scores there are. I'm going to return that. That'll give me the average scores. Let's see. Def. And I'm going to get the high score. I just need self again. Put our colon, and let's come down. So how do we figure out what the high score is? Well, there's a function that's built in to what we're doing that will give us the max. And it should be built in, should run without having to import max. But let's go see. And how we're going to do this is we're going to say, we're going to return max self dot scores. So that should be part of the list object that'll give us the maximum value within that list. So I shouldn't have to import anything. So that got if I called any of these, they will get us those values. What do we have left? Oh, I want to set. We need to set a value. Def set score. I need to be able to store something in that scores list. And I need to access self, I, and scores. I is where we're going in that list, and scores is scores. I've been dealing with that. So let's say self dot scores I, scores I, it's the index, equals score. So I'm going to pass a score. Oh, I don't want scores. Score. I want to pass in whatever the score is. Okay. So when I have set scores, I give it, I'm talking about the object, the index, and the score. So I just need the index and score, and I can do that. So let me see. Got high score, average. I've got, I can get the score, I can set the score. Get number of scores. We've got that. The only thing we've got left is returning some values that are in there. And let's do that here. So let's go ahead, def, underscore underscore str underscore underscore self, and then colon. And I want to get some space in between the previous one and this one. And we'll come down, and this is going to return a string representation of whatever the student is. Okay. Now, I've got this long, save me some time for typing. I'm going to, and this just gives us a string telling us about the student. So essentially what we did was we went and laid everything out. The score is this, another score. We went through item by item what these values are. Self dot, give me the high score, give me the average. So it goes and invokes these functions. So now I think we're about right on this. If I run it here, it went through and it populated, took one and created one and randomly generated numbers. Got the high score for Juan and his average. Did the same thing for Bill and each of the others. So we did what it wanted us to do, and max worked. The main thing was, is it printing out the things that we wanted it to print? And it created the new line to bring it down item by item. So, excuse me. We come over and look and see, is it going to test okay? Appears to have tested fine. we have get number of scores, and let's look and see what was it looking for. It looks to see if values exist in there. So this essentially calls our class. It didn't run the stuff down below. It called our class, the student object. And it gave it number of scores 3, called it Jim, and ran through it random ints 70 and 100 and printed out the number of scores and what we had to have. So it's saying, yeah, it worked. Everything that we had to do for that test actually worked. And it did it. Jim randomly generated and the calculations. This other one did the same thing. Jim randomly and went to find the high score. So it's just testing to see, based on the inputs, did it come up with what they were looking for? Did you get 100 for the high score? Did you get 3 for the number of scores? And this one went and looked. Did you get 90 for the average? Did the calculation come up with Jim as the name when it invoked get name? So it came up with values that it could pass to our class. It created an instance of it with the name Jim, and it did its thing. And that's how they tested us. So this class could be in a file on its own, and we could refer to it as much as we want and just create more and more instances of a student object and reuse it over and over again. Here's where they used it and what they did. And it ran fine. Talk more in class, and I'll see you soon.